The famous Fitzwilliam album with the miniatures of the Bukhara school is kept in a special font. Many of these miniatures used to be illustrations for the manuscripts, which have not survived. Initially, the album contained 48 folios with miniatures. Part of this album was auctioned off, whereas the other parts are dispersed among various museums around the world. They are kept at Louvre in France, the Freer Art Gallery in Washington, and the Museum of Art in San Diego in USA, and the Museum of Islamic Art in Qatar. As for the UK itself, beside the Fitzwilliam Museum, folios from this album are kept at the British Museum and the Victoria and Albert Museum. It is known that some folios of this album were auctioned off from the various auction houses. It is only a very small part of a big and very impressive collection of Islamic art. We should call the Fitzwilliam album the Manuk album, according to the provenance, because the person who was collecting and put it here was called Percival Manuk. He was a supreme judge in Patna, and he started to collect Indian, Persian, and generally Islamic art where he was in India. The Fitzwilliam Museum has currently 24 folios in its collection. This album is also called the Album of Akbar the Great, since many researchers believe that the miniature collected from the last manuscripts were intended as a gift to the great Baburid Emperor Akbar, who united India. He was the grandson of the great Zahruddin Muhammad Babur and the third emperor of the Mughal dynasty. But there is also another version, according to which this album might have been commissioned by Akbar himself, or by the Akbar's mother, Hamida Bano Begum. The miniatures kept in the Fitzwilliam Museum illustrate the life of Mughal emperors. Humayun is accepting the gifts of the Persian delegation. Akbar is watching the camel fight. Here we see a composition where Akbar's father Humayun receiving the embassy and depicted in the upper part, whereas the young Akbar watching the camel fight is depicted in the lower part. Another miniature called The Teacher and His Student depicts Akbar, a young man writing on a sheet of paper. The text is inscribed in large calligraphic handwriting on the back of this miniature. According to Firuza Melville, all identified poetic lines in Akbar albums belong to Sufi authors. Abdurrahman Jami, Amir Khusrau Dehlavi, Hafiz, and Saadi. In Akbar's albums there is a miniature. A young wrestler is defeated by his teacher, illustrating the plot of the story from Gulistan by Saadi. This is immediately recognizable story. Any artist would immediately say that it's coming from. It's a story about very experienced master, the wrestler, who is fighting with his pupil, whom he taught all the tricks and skills he knew himself except the last one. And once the cunning pupil decided to demonstrate his skills he learned from his teacher in front of the ruler. However, the teacher obviously overwhelmed him. There is another poem with the name of the calligrapher, and around the painting there is a quatrain saying that the champion is not the one who can overwhelm his enemy. The true champion is the one who can suppress his anger and the critical point. The calligrapher's name is Mir Ali. Among the artists and calligraphers whose names are mentioned in the album, there are those of Mahmoud Muzahib and Sheikh Zadeh. According to the museum documents, the famous calligrapher Mir Ali Hosseini, who was also involved in the creation of the album. Only 2 miniatures from this album were shown at the exhibition called From Kabul to Calcutta. All the miniatures that we show you are an absolute exclusive. Miniatures with girls depicted on them are quite typical. You can recognize the iconography and the minor details of the ornamentation of the background, and also the details of the clothes of the dancing girls. The researchers don't really know if they were seriously retouched when they arrived in India, but the original design and the iconography, as I mentioned above, are very similar to Bukhara style.